I remember that evening as clearly as the ache in my bones. The November wind carried the scent of wood smoke through the open kitchen window, brushing against the lace curtains I'd washed just yesterday. I was standing by the stove, stirring the gravy, thick, rich, full of memories. My husband, Richard, used to say I made it better than any restaurant chef. I could still hear his voice teasing, "Mary, if love had a taste, it'd be your gravy." But love had no place in that house anymore. Vanessa's laughter echoed from the living room, sharp, practiced, hollow. She was entertaining guests again. "Just family," she'd said earlier with that rehearsed smile. Yet, when I peeked from the kitchen doorway, I saw 3 couples I'd never met, all dressed like they were attending a gala. The chandelier light glistened off their wine glasses. My family looked like strangers in my own home. Well, what used to be mine? The table was already set. Silver cutlery, linen napkins folded like swans, every detail perfect. I noticed there wasn't a seat for me. I counted twice. There were 8 chairs. 9 guests. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying not to feel that familiar sting behind my eyes. I told myself it's just a mistake. She probably forgot. But deep down I knew. Vanessa didn't forget things. She planned them. When Richard passed away, I'd let our son, Daniel, and Vanessa move into this house. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to keep the family close, to help them while Daniel's business was finding its feet. He'd been so grateful. "Mom, I'll take care of you forever," he'd promised. But life has its own cruel clock, doesn't it? One day he was alive, the next he wasn't. A heart attack at 42. Gone before I could even say goodbye. And from that day, Vanessa's eyes toward me changed. First she was polite, quiet, distant. Then slowly, a glare here, a sigh there, a whisper under her breath. Soon it became open disdain. I became the old lady who used too much sugar, who forgot things, who didn't contribute. She never said those words directly. Not until that night. I was finishing the last touches of the mashed potatoes when I heard her voice from the dining room. "Oh, don't worry about Mother Mary," she said with a smirk. "She loves staying in the kitchen, she feels useful there." Laughter followed. Not the kind that warms a room, the kind that cuts through your chest. My hands trembled. I set down the spoon, trying to breathe. I reminded myself that these people didn't know me, didn't know what I'd given to build this family, this home. They just saw an old woman with an apron and gray hair. I glanced at the photo on the fridge. Richard, me, Daniel, and little Sophie and James when they were small. We looked so happy. Now, Sophie barely looked up from her phone when I passed her in the hallway. And James, well, he called me Grandma only when he needed spending money. Still, I told myself, it's family. You endure family. I carried the serving dish to the dining room, trying to keep my smile steady. Vanessa looked up, clearly annoyed. "Oh, Mary," she said, forcing a sweet tone. "You can just leave it on the side table. We'll help ourselves." I hesitated. "There's not enough space on the table," I asked softly. Vanessa tilted her head, that smile tightening. "Well, you see, we invited a few extra guests tonight. So, you can just grab a plate later if you're hungry." It was said lightly, as though she were offering me a kindness. But her friend's eyes flicked toward me, curious, judgmental, and I felt the room grow heavier. "Oh, come on, Vanessa," one of the women said with a laugh. "Let her join. Family should eat together." Vanessa laughed, waving a hand. "Oh, believe me, she prefers to eat alone. Don't you, Mary?" My throat tightened. "I suppose I can eat later," I said quietly. And that's when she said it. She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You should be grateful we even keep you here, considering you bring nothing to this house." Time stopped. The clinking of forks, the hum of chatter. It all went silent. I felt the words hit me harder than any slap. Even the air felt thinner. I wanted to speak, to remind her whose name was carved into the wooden beam above the fireplace, whose hands planted the rose garden out front, whose money had built this dining room. But the words died on my tongue. Instead, I looked down at my wrinkled hands, The same hands that had once held my son when he was sick, that had cleaned up after everyone in this house, that had built every corner of this home with love. I managed a small nod. "You're right, dear," I whispered. "I should be grateful." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa smirked, triumphant. I excused myself, murmuring something about checking the dessert. Back in the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, staring at the flickering light above the stove. My heart ached, not just from the insult, but from how normal it had started to feel. The slow erosion of respect, the quiet theft of dignity. Then, from the dining room, I heard laughter again. More laughter. I realized in that moment that this wasn't my home anymore. It was a gilded cage. I looked around the kitchen, the one place she hadn't yet redecorated. Richard's wooden spice rack still hung on the wall. His handwriting still labeled each jar. Paprika, oregano, love, not too much salt. I smiled faintly. Then my eyes drifted to the old key hanging beside it, the one Richard had given me years ago. "The study key," he'd said. "Our secrets stay safe here." That key hadn't been used in years. Not since the funeral. But that night, as the house quieted, I reached for it. My hands stopped trembling. Everyone else had gone to bed. The laughter was gone, replaced by the ticking of the hallway clock. I walked down the corridor, the floor creaking beneath my slippers. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, silvering the edges of the framed photos. When I reached the study door, my heart beat faster. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the air smelled like old books and cedar. The desk was just as Richard had left it. Tidy, meticulous, everything in its place. I sat in his leather chair and opened the drawer. And there it was. The original deed to the house. Name: Marian Harper. Not Daniel's. Not Vanessa's. I traced my finger over the embossed seal, feeling a calmness settle in me. The calm that comes when pain turns to purpose. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. Felt powerful. I closed the drawer, locked it again, and whispered into the silence. "You think you own this house, Vanessa. But tomorrow, you'll find out who really does." Then I blew out the candle, and for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. Because the woman they mocked at dinner was gone. And the one waking up tomorrow wasn't going to be grateful anymore. People always say grief changes you, but they never tell you how quietly it does it. It doesn't arrive like a storm, it seeps in like fog. One morning, you just wake up and realize your house doesn't sound the same without his laughter in it. The kettle whistles, the floors creak, but there's no humming in the hallway, no hand reaching for yours at breakfast. When Richard died, the silence became unbearable. We'd been married for 43 years. We built everything together, this home, this life, our boy, Daniel. He was the light of both our worlds. He had his father's strong jaw, his quick humor, and his habit of checking on me 3 times a day even after he moved out. I thought that kind of devotion meant I'd never be alone. But life doesn't always respect what we think we deserve. After the funeral, I'd sit by the window for hours, watching the driveway. Not because I was waiting for visitors, though part of me hoped, but because it was the same spot where Richard used to park his old truck. The gravel still bore its tire marks. I couldn't bear to see them fade. A few weeks later, Daniel came by with Vanessa. I still remember how elegant she looked. Tall, polished, expensive perfume that filled the living room before she even spoke. She smiled, hugged me, called me Mom with a warmth that almost felt genuine. She said all the right things. "We'll take care of you, Mom. You shouldn't be alone in this big house." At the time it sounded like love. In hindsight it was strategy. They moved in the next month. I thought it was temporary. A kind gesture to help me adjust. Vanessa decorated, Daniel renovated the porch, and for a little while I felt less lonely. We'd eat dinner together, laugh about old memories, even argue playfully about recipes. But small changes began to appear, subtle at first. The family photos on the hallway wall, the ones of Richard and me from our younger days, disappeared one by one. I found them in a storage box in the garage. Oh, I'm just updating the decor, Vanessa had said, smiling sweetly. She replaced them with photos of her and Daniel at beaches, parties, award ceremonies. I said nothing. I didn't want conflict. I told myself she was grieving too, just differently. But grief doesn't make you cruel. One morning, I came into the kitchen and found Vanessa rearranging the spice rack, Richard's spice rack. I told her softly, "Oh honey, those are labeled a certain way. Richard liked them." She cut me off with a laugh. "Well, Richard's not here anymore, is he?" That one sentence hit me harder than I let her see. I just nodded, stepped aside, and went out to water the garden. My refuge, my sanctuary. But even there, her touch began to creep in. She replaced my clay pots with sleek planters, tore out the rose bushes I'd planted on our 10th anniversary, and put in those tall, colorless ornamental grasses that she said were modern. Every piece of the life Richard and I built was slowly erased, remodeled, rewritten, until the house didn't feel like ours anymore. And Daniel, he was slipping away too. He didn't notice her small cruelties. Or maybe he did and chose peace over confrontation. He'd tell me, "Mom, she just likes things her way. You know how she is." I did know how she was. She wanted control. And she got it. Then Daniel's heart attack hit. 42. Perfectly healthy. Gone in an instant. Broke me. It broke her too, or at least she looked like it did. At the funeral, she cried into my shoulder. She said, "You're all I have left." I believed her. But grief didn't unite us, it freed her. From that day on, she stopped pretending. The first time she called me Mary instead of Mom, I froze. It was casual, deliberate. The kind of thing you do once to test if someone will fight back. I didn't. Then she started closing doors when she had company, lowering her voice when she was on the phone. I caught her once showing someone around the house, talking about remodeling, expansion, potential property value. Like I was invisible. "Vanessa," I said, "why are you talking about selling the house?" She turned, smiled that sweet venomous smile and said, "Oh Mom, I mean Mary, we're just discussing possibilities. It's all hypothetical." Hypothetical. But one evening, I overheard her son, James, talking in the hallway. "When Grandma moves out, can I have her room?" he'd asked. Moves out. That night, I sat in my rocking chair by the window and cried for hours. Not because I was being pushed out, but because I realized I'd allowed it to happen slowly, quietly, inch by inch. When you love your family, you excuse their cruelty as misunderstanding. You call it tension, stress, exhaustion, anything but what it really is: betrayal. Then came the dinner parties. At first, they were occasional, then weekly. Vanessa loved to host, to show off her home, my home, to her wealthy friends. She'd tell stories that always made her the hero and me the punchline. "She's so stubborn," she'd say, laughing. "She refuses to let me hire help. She likes to feel needed." They'd all laugh, clinking their wine glasses, unaware that I was standing just behind the kitchen door, listening. The thing about humiliation is, it never gets easier. You just get quieter. So I started planning my days around her moods. When she had guests, I stayed in my room. When she was out shopping, I came downstairs to cook. I started tiptoeing in my own house. And then, about 3 months before that fateful night, I overheard her speaking to someone on the phone. "Yes," she said, "the property is under her name, but she's not all there anymore. I'm working on it. A few more months, and it'll be ours." I felt my stomach turn cold. I didn't confront her. Instead, I quietly began visiting the town attorney, an old friend of Richard's. I told him everything. He promised to help me secure the legal ownership and keep everything documented. That visit gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. I didn't tell Vanessa. I didn't even act differently. I just waited. And then came the night of that dinner. The mockery. The humiliation. The sentence that broke the last thread holding my restraint. "You're lucky we even keep you here." They laughed that night, but I didn't. I just cleaned up quietly, walked to my room, and began putting away the few things that truly belonged to me: Richard's watch, our wedding photo, the deed, and the spare keys. The next morning when Vanessa came downstairs, she found a for sale sign planted on the front lawn. The locks had been changed. And for the first time in months, I made myself a cup of coffee in peace. The morning after Vanessa's cruel laughter still sits sharp in my chest like splinters. I woke before sunrise as I always did. The air was cold, the kind that bites your skin awake. Outside, dew clung to the grass, and a thin fog wrapped around the edges of the garden, the one she'd modernized. It used to bloom with my roses, but now it was all gray-green stalks swaying stiffly in the breeze, like strangers in a place that once felt alive. I brewed a pot of coffee the old way, the way Richard liked it, with cinnamon and cardamom. The smell filled the kitchen, cutting through the sterile air of that house. I sat at the table, cup in my hands, staring at the empty chair across from me. 4 years I'd sat across from my husband here. Now I sat across from ghosts. Vanessa came downstairs around 7, humming some pop song, wearing her robe and tapping away on her phone. She didn't look up when she saw me. "Morning," she said flatly. "Morning," I replied, quiet but steady. She poured herself a cup from my coffee pot, took a sip, then frowned. "Too strong. You really should switch to decaf, Mary. It's not good for your blood pressure." "Good. I'm glad you're finally listening." That was the moment. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles before something inevitable. I went upstairs, opened my old writing desk, and pulled out the folder I'd kept hidden beneath Richard's navy jacket. The house deed, the trust documents, and a few signed forms the attorney had prepared months ago. All neatly bound, notarized, finalized. I'd been waiting for the right time. And that moment, that condescending, dismissive Mary. Was it? By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in my attorney's office downtown. The same office where Richard and I had first signed the purchase papers for that house 40 years ago. The same office where, just a few weeks ago, I'd updated my will to make sure Vanessa would never touch a cent of it. Mr. Whitaker, my attorney, looked up from the documents and smiled kindly. "You're sure about this, Mary?" "I've never been surer of anything," I said. He nodded. "We'll file the transfer and sale papers today. Since the property is in your name alone, there's no obstacle. Once it's on the market, we can expedite the sale. You'll have full proceeds in your account within the month." "Good," I said, my voice calm. "And the locks? I'll have my contractor meet you there this afternoon. We'll rekey everything. You'll have the only set." I smiled then, the first genuine smile in months. When I drove back, the house stood under that same cold morning sun, still and quiet. The wind chime Richard hung on the porch all those years ago rattled faintly. I touched it and whispered, "It's time, love." By noon the contractor arrived. A kind young man named Eli. I offered him tea while he worked. He replaced every lock, the front, the back, the basement, even the garage. Then he stood on the lawn, hammering the for sale sign into the earth with steady, echoing thuds. I watched from the porch, arms folded, feeling something stir inside me. Not guilt, not joy exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from finally drawing a line in the sand. When the sign stood upright, glinting under the sunlight, I said quietly, "Looks perfect." Eli smiled. "You moving out, ma'am?" I looked at him, then back at the house. At the windows where laughter had turned to mockery, where family had turned to strangers. "No," I said softly. "They are." Vanessa returned that afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, reading one of Richard's old fishing magazines, when the door handle jiggled. Then it stopped. Then came the furious knocking. "Mary, what's going on? My key isn't working." I set down my magazine, walked calmly to the door, and opened it halfway. She stood there, flustered, her designer purse hanging off one arm, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. Behind her, the for sale sign gleamed proudly in the lawn. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing. I tilted my head slightly. "Exactly what it says. You can't do that. This is my home too." "No, Vanessa," I said gently. "It never was. You were just visiting." Her face turned red. "You're losing your mind." Do you have any idea how much I've put into this house? I paid for renovations, for decor, for... Cut her off. For show. You didn't build this home. Richard did. I did. You only staged it for your audience. She glared at me, arms crossed. You'll regret this. I'll get a lawyer. You can, I said with a shrug. But it won't matter. Already spoke to mine. The deed, the trust, the sale, all finalized. You have no claim. Her jaw dropped slightly, and for the first time since Daniel's death, I saw fear flicker across her face. Not grief. Not anger. Fear. Behind her, one of her friends pulled up in a white SUV. The same women she'd mocked me in front of last night. They stared at the sign, whispering. Vanessa's voice wavered. You're making a scene, Mary. No, I said calmly. You made the scene. I'm just closing the curtain. And I shut the door. The rest unfolded like clockwork. Within a week, the house was officially listed. The realtor came by, impressed by the condition, the neighborhood, the potential. Offers poured in fast. It was worth far more than Vanessa ever realized. Nearly $2.5 million. She tried calling me repeatedly. I didn't answer. She sent texts filled with pleading, threats, apologies. I read them all, then deleted them one by one. Then, one evening, a message from her number came. But it wasn't her. It was her daughter, Lily. Grandma, Mommy is crying. Why are we moving? That one hurt. That one cut deeper than any of Vanessa's words. I sat with that message for hours, my phone glowing in the dark. I didn't reply, not yet. The next morning, I called Lily's school and arranged for her tuition to be paid in full for the next 5 years. I made it anonymous. She didn't need to know where it came from. Not yet. Love doesn't always need an audience. 2 weeks later, Vanessa came by again. This time calmer, desperate. She stood at the porch in tears. Mary, please. I went too far. I was angry, I was grieving. I said things I shouldn't have. Please, let's talk. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't cruel in that moment. Just small, hollowed out by her own choices. I forgive you, I said simply. Her eyes flickered with hope. Then we can stay. I shook my head gently. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, dear. It means I can let you go without hate. She blinked. So that's it. You're just going to sell the house out from under us. I smiled sadly. No, Vanessa. I'm selling the house from above you. You've been living beneath me this whole time. For a moment she didn't understand. Then she turned, saw the sign, saw the neighbors watching, and realized she'd lost. The house sold that month. I packed my things slowly, carefully. The photograph she'd hidden, the keepsake she'd ignored, Richard's favorite chair. When the final papers were signed, I sat on the porch one last time with my coffee, watching the sunset bleed gold across the garden. The new owners would arrive in a few days, a young couple expecting their first child. They'd already told me they wanted to replant roses. That made me smile. Before I left, I took one last walk through the house. Every creak, every corner held a memory. Some painful, some sweet. I paused at the dining room, where she'd once mocked me before her friends. The table was gone, but the echo of that laughter still lingered. I whispered softly, "Goodbye, Richard. We did it." And then, for the first time in years, I walked out with my head held high. Now I live in a small cottage near the lake, quiet and simple. The kind of place that smells of pine and peace. I grow roses again, wild, untamed, just the way I like them. Sometimes I get postcards from Lily. She writes about school, about art class, about how she misses my apple pie. I send her little gifts, books, paint sets, never signed with my name. But one day, when she's old enough to understand, she'll know the truth. That sometimes love means standing up. That silence can be power. And that dignity, once reclaimed, is the most beautiful revenge of all. It's been 3 months since I walked away from that house for the last time. 3 months since the sound of that heavy front door closing behind me echoed like a final heartbeat. The end of one chapter, the beginning of another. The first few days felt strange. 4 years I'd lived surrounded by noise. Footsteps in the hallway, arguments over decor, laughter that wasn't mine. Now there was only silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was full of peace, full of room to breathe again. The cottage I moved into is nothing grand. Just a small wooden home by a lake, about an hour outside of town. The air smells cleaner here, the mornings come slower, and the sunsets. Oh, the sunsets. They stretch over the water in ribbons of gold and pink, like the world is trying to remind me that beauty doesn't ask permission. It just exists. At first, I kept expecting to hear someone calling me, needing something, asking for something. But no one did. And slowly, I began to realize how long I'd been answering to people who never listened. I started doing small things again, things I hadn't done in years. I began baking bread on Sunday mornings, just for myself. I painted my kitchen walls a soft green, the color Richard once said matched my eyes. I planted roses outside, wild and stubborn, the kind that bloom even when no one tends to them. One evening I found an old record player in one of my moving boxes. I set it up by the window and played the song that had been playing the night Richard proposed. Moon River. And for the first time since he passed, I danced. Just me, alone in my little kitchen, spinning slowly, tears on my cheeks but laughter in my throat. I realized then that grief doesn't leave. It just softens. It stops demanding to be felt and starts asking to be remembered. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Vanessa. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Inside just a short note. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll visit. Lily asks about you often. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I took out my stationery, the kind with blue flowers along the edges, and wrote back. Forgiveness isn't something I give. It's something I live. Tell Lily I'm proud of her. And take care of yourself, Vanessa. No anger. No lecture. Just peace. Because the truth is, once you stop fighting for people to value you, you start valuing yourself enough for both of you. Last week I got a call from my realtor. The house sold for even higher than expected. The funds cleared, and the new family had already moved in. He said they'd started replanting the garden. Roses, peonies, daisies. And he mentioned something that made me laugh softly. They'd found one of Richard's old fishing lures buried under the porch beam. Still shiny, untouched by time. It felt like his little wink from heaven, his way of saying, "You did the right thing, sweetheart." Sometimes I drive past that neighborhood on my way into town. Not to gloat. Not to reminisce. Just to see it. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels distant, like a dream I've already woken from. People often say revenge is about destruction. But that's not true. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, is about rebuilding yourself so completely that the people who broke you can no longer recognize you. That's what I did. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just smiled, walked away, and built a life so peaceful that their chaos can't reach me anymore. Sometimes at dusk I sit by the lake with a cup of tea and think about everything, about the pain, the betrayal, the loss. But I also think about the strength that grew quietly inside me while everyone else was too busy underestimating me. I think about Richard, about his soft laugh, about the way he used to say, "You've got the fire of 10 people in you, Mary." And maybe he was right. Because that fire still burns, steady, not wild anymore. Warm enough to light my way, not scorch my heart. The wind rustles through the roses, and I smile. I may have lost a house, but I found myself again. And that, I've learned, is worth far more than any home, any apology, or any false kind of love.